Hello there, and welcome to the Get French Football News preview show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening is it's just the two of us, in fact, it's our very own Adam White. It's been yeah. Yes, would it be a two-way conversation tonight? I think Adam and we'll fill the air as much as we can. We had an excellent little round of Coupe de la Ligue action, as well as we'll look forward to the Ligue 1 games that are ahead of us. But before that, I'm just going to round up those results and the winners, at least, of the Coupe de la Ligue fixtures, as Caen won 1-0 away at Lorient. Montpellier went away to Guingamp and took a 2-0 win, while Lille needed penalties against Valenciennes, winning 5-4 on the spot kicks after a 2-2 draw after extra time. Angers walked past just about Nancy with a 3-2 victory. Rennes are through to the next round by beating Dijon 2-1. Metz put their league form behind them, at least for now, with a 1-0 win over Red Star. And Toulouse are in the hat for the next round as well, with a 4-2 win over Clermont. And Amiens won 2-1 away at Troyes. Strasbourg beat Saint-Etienne on penalties with a 1-1 draw over extra time, and then 5-4 on penalties. And the real surprise of the round, and it's the one I want to talk to you about, really, Adam, and given the form in the league, especially, it was really surprising to see Tours score very quickly and put themselves in a great position within the first 30 minutes.
Yeah, I watched that. I caught up with that game today, and it was ridiculous. I think that it says a lot about Nantes' squad. It was really exciting to see Tours, who are a pretty small Ligue 2 side, not really been in and around Ligue 1, and to see them sort of be 3-0 up inside 19 minutes was really quite something. But if you look at Nantes' squad, they rested a lot of players for this game. Latata Rossano didn't play. Diego Carlos, Kofi Djidji, Leo Dubois, Abdoulaye Touré has been great this season. Nakouma was rested out, and Salah was injured. So they were sort of very, very threadbare. I think it proves that although Ranieri has managed to sort of start to coalesce that first 11, he's got a very good first 11, maybe sort of 13 players maybe. But beyond that, especially defensively, they're a little bit thin. And Nicolas Paulois, sort of coming back from injury, and he only made the bench at the weekend. Him and his sort of very young sort of group or inexperienced group of defenders that started alongside him with David, I never know how to pronounce his name, Aldesidabe, I think. Anthony Bolonga as well played. And they're sort of very inexperienced guys sort of come up perhaps from the B team, and perhaps they're not of the quality of Diego Carlos and Kofi Djidji. So it really showed that perhaps, although Ranieri's starting to get somewhere with that team, that the squad itself, if they get a couple of injuries later in the year, that could really hamper their sort of European aspirations, if you like. But it was a good game, and I thoroughly enjoyed Tours, sort of racing into that lead. It was very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you that are wondering why there's not many big names in that kind of draw, they are in the next round, where the round of 32, which is quite a nice little go-to to get to.
Yeah,
that you sort of skip all that awkward little travels to potentially third division sides or second division sides and straight into the last.
It's quite a weird competition, the Coupe de Ligue, because I was going to mention that there actually isn't any extra time at this point. It goes straight to penalties, which is probably a good idea given that the fixture congestion and the League Cups themselves are sort of the least important competition. So that's quite good. And the fact that there are two national sides, I think, that start in the first round. So there's the top two national sides, or maybe the two that got relegated last year from Ligue 2. So it's sort of a weird mix of teams, and then you get the 6 European sides coming in pretty much near the end. They get quite a good bye going on. So yeah, it's sort of unusual sort of style of competition. But at this round, it's often quite good because you sort of get the sort of lower Ligue 2 sides that have had won 2 games already, I think, some of them. And they sort of play some of the bigger Ligue 1 sides who perhaps at this stage aren't taking it that seriously. So you get the games like Tours against Nantes yesterday, and Clermont-Toulouse was a brilliant game as well, 4-2 to Toulouse, as you mentioned. So you get some really good games.
It seems strange when you think about it. The only one we could probably compare in England is the Carabao Cup as it is now, and they only get a bye for the first couple of rounds. But then again, someone might say that Manchester United, especially, have had a few byes already in that cup and have got another one possibly coming up. But yeah, it's a great little competition. But it is. I always feel it's a great chance for any of those 6 sides that are in Europe to really push for a cup, because like you say, they don't have that fixture congestion. Okay, they are playing in Europe, obviously, but should they struggle like a team? Well, one of the teams that aren't in it at the moment is one of the sides like Bordeaux. They've not played any European football in the end, and
pretty
they've
much,
got to skip. Yeah, they've got to skip to this round, and that's a great chance. Them being fit, them having enough of a squad, they can maybe challenge for it. Although you would expect it's probably either Paris Saint-Germain or unless a miracle happens against them that they will be one of the ones in the final. But
especially if they've done like the cup double, haven't they? Last 3 seasons, I think they've done, because they won the treble the 2 before, but they've done the cup. They win the cups quite consistently. So.
Yeah, they're a nuisance for that, aren't they? It always feels like. Anyway, don't give anyone else a chance. Let's move on to the Ligue 1 fixtures really now, and the weekend ahead looks actually really interesting. It starts on Friday with Paris Saint-Germain hosting Nice in a really intriguing affair. Really, two sides that are doing separate things. Obviously, starting with the hosts, Adam, they've got no Neymar in this one. It looks like Di Maria will be the man who will debutise. What are you thinking about them ahead of this one?
I think it's a relatively important game. It's a home, obviously, and given their sort of last few results, we talked on Monday's show about the fact that although they're continuing to win, they're 4 points clear at the top, I think. They're continuing to get good results. If you look at them on face value, they're not actually playing as well as perhaps they would expect to be. And we talked a lot about the fact that they're becoming a bit complacent and even arrogant in some respects. And I kind of felt Neymar in particular in the La Classique last weekend had a bit of an air of overconfidence to him, which is a little bit disappointing. And that partly fed into his sending off as well. But I think this is an important game for PSG to reassert their sort of, it's not that their dominance is really in question, but reassert their authority a little bit after the draw of Marseille. They were lucky not to lose in Marseille against a team that have actually done okay against bigger sides. They beat Monaco 4-0, Nice, despite the fact that they're way down on their form from last season. So it'd be really interesting to see whether Di Maria can fill that gap filled by Neymar, because the last time Neymar didn't play for PSG, they didn't score, which is in that Montpellier draw, the 0-0 game. 3 or 4 games ago now, which is sort of this first sort of little chink I kind of thought in their armor. Maybe even against Lyon, they're a little bit complacent. 2 own goals, won that game 2-0. But they sort of a little bit of an individualistic attitude from some of the guys playing for PSG in that they kind of feel like they're going to win the league. They can sort of be a bit too sort of showboaty and try and do it all themselves and try and score like these sort of screamers or worldies of goals and without really taking it as seriously as they might have. And I think Mbappe mentioned after Le Classique that they didn't take it too seriously. I actually just saw that Neymar has been given a 2-game ban. I was extremely surprised by it, given it was 2 yellow cards. He missed the game against Angers as well, I think. I was wondering, because you weren't on Monday's show, what you thought of his sending off and whether that's a bit harsh or not. It feels like it is.
I think the whole scenario is a little bit harsh, in all honesty, Adam. I was privy to your talk on Monday, and we were sort of cut down the middle. And first booking, yeah, okay, it's a little bit silly. I can accept that one. But in all honesty, in my world, the second one, he's done nothing really, hasn't he? Campos has fell like a sack of taters, as we would say.
I'm surprised because I kind of felt like Neymar. He was asking to be booked. It was a bit obviously not deliberately, but doing that, you're really running a risk, aren't you?
Yeah. At the same time, I think the referee has to use a bit more common sense than that. I think that Neymar had been kicked from pillar to post throughout the entire game, and this was a cheeky one for Campos. Really, both him and I can't quite remember who was in front of him just before that. It might have been Gustavo, but they were both having a bit of a nibble, and Campos takes a cheeky one is maybe the nicest way of putting it. I think it's a little bit sinister, really. It's not in the sense of hurting him. He's just trying to wind him up even further. And yes, Neymar reacts, but does he really do anything? Not really. He pushes his chest out. He's trying to maybe stick up for himself a bit here and say, hey, this ends, really. This ends. I'm sick of being kicked in this game. I should be getting more protection. And this was an issue he brought up in Spain a lot as well, of getting kicked and fouled, and referees not protecting him. And I think this was the case here. I think some Marseille fans will say, he should be all right with it. He's the world's best player. But there was numerous occasions where he had to break past 2 or 3 players, and he'd be kicked every single time. And okay, he's not been given a free kick, fair enough, because he's managed to stay on his feet and managed to get through it, and credit to him. But he should be more protected, and players like that should be more protected, because then what are you encouraging other than if someone kicks him, he might as well go down, because otherwise there's no point for him to stand up, because if he stands up, the players aren't going to get punished for it. So the referee needs to have a better control on this game. And frankly, it's one of those scenarios with Ocampos where I would hope if it was in England with the new laws on diving, I would have a retrospective ban for him, because I thought that was shocking. It was almost...
I can definitely see that. Sorry, go on, carry on.
I'm just going to say Rivaldo-esque from...
right, the World Cup in 2002 with the... Yeah, I can... He definitely was, it was ridiculous how he went down, like you said. The only thing I would say about that is that he is going to have to get used to that. I know that we don't want to see players being kicked, like you said, and being targeted a little bit. Perhaps he was targeted a little bit by Marseille, but Ligue 1 is traditionally a sort of more physical league than La Liga. In fact, arguably the top sort of 5 leagues, La Liga is the sort of least sort of tough, if you like. So I think that although, I would have got frustrated, anybody would have got frustrated about the attention he was getting, but it's something that he is going to have to get used to, because teams are going to use that tactic again. It clearly worked. It got him sent off, and they were very lucky to win the game, right? Or to draw, I should say.
Exactly, but I also think that, as well as it being a responsibility on Neymar to keep his cool, it is absolutely a responsibility of a referee to do more to control that, because it's gaining an unfair advantage in some way, really, that a player like that, who, like I said, got kicked regularly and stayed on his feet, so was staying honest, should be rewarded for that, in a sense of saying him either warning players or booking players after the fact. And that just didn't happen, really, unfortunately. And it feels a bit strange to be sticking up for the rich boys and the posh man of the class. But I felt sorry for Neymar in that one, and I thought throughout the game that the ref was a little bit out of control of the entire affair, really. But they face a Nice side that, good grief, you can't really tell where they're going from week to week, really, can you, Adam?
No, you can't. No, it is ridiculous. Like what a good squad they have, and that it's sort of almost sort of not entirely, but it's verging on capitulation, isn't it? If you look at the league table and you see them down there in 14th, having lost 6 of 10 games, more than they lost in all of last season, and to see them be easily, sort of much more easily cut open and exploited, their weaknesses are so much more exploited by other sides. Perhaps they've been figured out a little bit. I'm maybe even of the opinion that the jury's out a little bit, but the way it went at Gladbach for Lucien Favre, when it went wrong and eventually he left, it kind of fell off a cliff for them. And it's a bit early to say it's going to happen, because he was at Gladbach for a long time. He's only been at Nice for like over 14 months or so. But it has that feel that they sort of lost their intensity and lost that sort of X factor that made them such a compelling side and such a difficult side to beat. And it's really sad, because they were such a good watch last year, and they're now still a good watch, but for a very, very different reason, in that teams like Strasbourg going there and winning, and Troyes went there and won earlier in the season. But as I said earlier on, they've still got good performances in them, which is, hope. It gives a lot of sort of hope for Lucien Favre and his team. And that 4-0 win over Monaco being a good example of the fact that they can still put performances together. Monaco weren't great on the day, but I still felt like they were very, very impressive in that 4-0 win. So I remember this game last year. PSG were actually really lucky to get a point from. Nice, I think, were 2-0 up after Cyprien's free kick. So it's really a matter of which Nice kind of turns up. We've seen a lot more of the worse side of them, and also for me, it's also sort of what is their best team, because we talked a lot about their recruitment over the summer and on various episodes of our podcast over the course of the season, and they've got Wesley Sneijder sitting on the bench, and I was just wondering whether you see a place for him. Where does he play in this team? Because if they're not playing well and you've got a player of that quality on the bench, I know that you were not overly enthused by his signing to start with, but surely he's a man that has the potential to improve things if they can find a way to fit him in, right?
Yeah, he has a lot of quality. There's no denying that Moisley Schneider at his best is a very good player, and I thought he did okay when he came on as well at the weekend. He tried to do something, it felt like, but they're just not set up for him, I don't think, and I don't think a player like that at the moment is going to fix the issues they have, which is defensively for one thing. Dante looks a step slower. He looks more like the player that was at Wolfsburg in the final couple of years that was lethargic and it doesn't look protected in sort of the back two back four. They're playing in two centre backs now. No one next to him seems to play well either, whether it's Le Marchand or Sarr, whose confidence seems to be shattered really from playing out left back and being thrown to the dogs at the end of last season, really, as well, after a couple of mistakes. And Le Marchand, we've just covered how I feel about Le Marchand. He's slow. He's positionally not great. He's okay on the ball, but at times he just forgets where he is a little bit and maybe does something a little bit rash or he's out of position and it leads to a goal. And they just need to figure out how they're going to set up in front of him as well. I mean, they've got terrific midfielders, but they just need a bit of solidity in there. Do they need to play Mendy more regularly now? Now he's back in the team. Do they need to put Remy Walter back in there and have him as a shield? Because they just seem so open at times. They just seem easy to pick through, which wasn't the case last season, especially in the first half of the season. And they just seem to have gone away from that. And we mentioned in the summer that losing Paul Bice was a big deal because they couldn't play that back three anymore, really.
No.
That's somewhere they need to invest in January if they can find someone to fill that hole. But they just look. They look like Mario Balotelli at the moment, don't they?
Yeah, it does kind of feel a little bit like that. I also thought Paul Bice was such a bizarre situation. The way he was sort of outcast at Etienne and then turned up at Nice and ended up being an absolute giant at centre back. And if you look at it ended up playing a back four a little bit at the end of last season, arguably better in a back three. But without Dante and Bice, also Dalbert left, and obviously Ricky Pereira went back to Porto. So they're almost starting again defensively in terms of a sort of a unit, if you like. That their first choice back four is very different. Although obviously Le Marchand and Arnausuke played a lot of games last season, the move to that back four is it's a new unit. And I have to deplore the signing of Christophe Jallet at 33, even though he was still in and around the French squad in the last sort of 18 months, 2 years or so. He is very much past it, and I'm not sure what they were trying to do with that kind of signing, given their recruitment in signing players like Ricardo Pereira had him on, I think, on a 2-year loan, I think, and players like Suke who they've really nurtured, and it felt like the obvious thing to do would be to keep doing that. It works, and find another fullback who would complement the other guy, 3 guys starting in that back three with a bit more pace and a bit more sort of gumption, if you like, in forward areas, perhaps because Jallet is a bit. Perhaps these days isn't the most isn't playing with much intensity, and he's isn't really fit. And I would have felt like they would have gone and signed another player in that position that fits their model. And it seems like they went with experience, which is fine, but they haven't been doing that in the past, and it served them really well. So that was a bizarre one. And in the midfield, you were saying what a good midfield they have, and if you look at Seri, Cyprian, even if you go Elise Mou, Mendy, Alan Saint-Maximin's been brilliant, and Vinci Cosiello, they've got some great options there. I think it's just one of those situations where it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, and I don't know how Favre's ending up. He's going to fit all those players in, because if you look at Balotelli and Player, I think Balotelli only really plays well when he's got Player alongside him, and that means you kind of have to play, unless you want to play Player out wide, I think he's far less effective there. Unless you kind of have to switch formation, and as you said, Nathan, they can't really play that three at the back without Paul Bice, or at least it's going to be a stretch with Marlon coming in, Sarr perhaps too. That's very much sort of untried. And then you've sort of got to figure out how you're going to play that midfield. Maybe that's Favre's plan, and he goes Seri, Cyprian, Schneider behind the front two of Balotelli and Player, and then he goes to sort of 3 centre backs, maybe. But I just feel like Favre's been unlucky in that Seri's been injured the last couple of games, and Cyprian's been injured for such a long time. That's huge for them. But he kind of needs to figure out that jigsaw puzzle, and he hasn't had the opportunity to do so yet.
Yes, if they can get Cyprian back, that'd be a massive, massive plus. And
Huge. Yeah.
they need a left back like a hole in the head, don't they? A little bit.
Yeah, they do.
And
Yeah.
also, anyone who watches La Liga and is wondering why we're actually clamouring for Paul Bice, we apologise. I do understand that he's been terrible, really, for
Oh,
Malaga.
really?
And
Has he?
yeah, which
Wow.
doesn't surprise me at the same time as doesn't it doesn't feel right at the same time from what he's done there last couple
Oh,
of years
wow.
at least. But never mind. What's the score for you in this one, Adam?
3-1 PSG.
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go 4-0. I think this might get a little bit ugly. This one, really, to be fair, and it might even be more than that if Nice aren't careful. We shall wait and see. And another great game. It happens almost straight afterwards on Saturday, the early evening kickoff, and that's Bordeaux hosting Monaco, which is a really interesting game again, Adam. And starting with the hosts who've gone off the boil a little bit recently since that defeat at PSG. They've got a draw at Nantes. They lost away at Amiens at the weekend, which was a disappointment. Is there something missing still from this team?
Perhaps. I think for the Amiens game, which was a bizarre game, by the way, given it was played in Le Havre and there wasn't the biggest sort of crowd there, and Bordeaux had a decent amount of fans in terms of percentages anyway, and Amiens sort of ran out 1-0 winners, and to be honest, they wasn't too undeserved. I think the defeat really showed how important Malcolm was for Bordeaux. But he had a bit of a late sort of muscle injury that meant he could only make the bench, and only came on after 75 minutes or so, and it felt like that they were lacking in creativity, and without him. He's got such good feet. He's got such good vision, and he sort of creates everything. He's one of those players, and when he gets the ball, something happens. And without him, they were sort of looking to someone that wasn't there to make chances. And Justin Gourville took the unusual step of not only obviously couldn't play Malcolm due to that injury, but he also left Francois Camano off the bench, who was kind of a poor man's Malcolm. He kind of does a similar thing, but not quite as well. So they were really sort of blunting forward areas of Mendy and then De Prevel, who as a player we both like, but it kind of felt like he was sort of, since he's joined anyway, he's been a bit on the fringes and he hasn't found his form. Maybe he's even slightly unfit, I don't know, but he definitely isn't in his best form. And Jonathan Capu as well, who's not really set the world alight either. So they just looked like a team who weren't going to score a goal. And without Malcolm, that's kind of that sort of the paradigm, if you like, might continue. I think beyond that as well, defensively is although it was a solitary goal, but if you look at their back four, Jeremy Tillman's not really a centre back. He's a makeshift centre back, and I know he's 34 now, and he's actually done okay there because he's obviously a very very talented player. But with in recent weeks, with Sabali injured and then Gajic, who's the kind of reserve right back, injured too, obviously that's unfortunate. But beyond their back four, their sort of first back four, they're lacking in options. And playing Igor Luzchuk, I can never say his name, Luzchuk, at right back he's sort of the classic centre back, and he's sort of a bit lumbering sometimes and a bit slow at 32. They're asking to be sort of outgunned on those flanks. So I think there are still a couple of issues here. But even so, if you look at the league table, they're doing pretty well, and there's that group of teams, isn't there, behind the top two, and they're in there, and they're actually seventh at the moment, looking at the table. But it depends. I was going to ask you what you thought of this, Nathan. What are their expectations this season, and do you think they can achieve those? Because they've been unfortunate, but that PSG defeat really has knocked the wind out of them, hasn't it?
It feels like it, doesn't it? I mean, they're currently sat in seventh, sandwiched between Saint-Etienne, who have been similarly hot and cold in recent weeks, and the Montpellier side that have come on a crazy surge. In this season, it feels like that third spot is really up for grabs for anyone that's willing to go out there and grasp it at the moment. Whether Bordeaux really feel that that's ambition, it's maybe a stretch, but at the same time, they should be aiming for the fourth, fifth spots, even with the likes of Lyon and Marseille and Saint-Etienne around those places. They've got the talent. They've got. Hopefully, they feel it's the coach. I know a lot of people really like Gourvenec, but it just feels like they've not quite clicked on what they want to be. You look at games and you look at some of the fixtures they've had. I mean, they drew 3-3 with Lyon. That feels like more the team you expect them to be. And then in recent weeks, they drew 1-1 with Nantes. They're just not clicking in one way or the other. They tend to either be not quite offensive enough, like in the 0-0 draw at Lille, or they seem a little bit too defensive or too anxious to do things. For example, in the 1-0 win at Toulouse, where they weren't particularly great, but they nicked out the win. I think they need to lean on players like Malcolm and Kamano, who's not had the greatest start to the season, but he is a talented player. And just get them attacking, give them a freedom, and it just feels like, for example, if Prévost gets a goal, it will all start firing for him. It feels like if Kamano just has a good game under his belt, there's something then to him, because then in January you can maybe do something with your defence, because it's just slow and plodding, especially in the middle, without much cover either, because they're trying to fit several players in there. Otavio is relatively defensive, but again isn't necessarily that kind of player. Same with Rajay, and Sankara is obviously more of a box-to-box player, and when they play Varda next to him, it eliminates an extra one from there. They just need a little bit more reinforcement there, and then they might be something. But until then, you just feel that the attacking options at Lyon, you feel that the attacking options at Marseille as well, probably just outweigh them a little bit, and that's what's holding them back. But they do face Monaco, who did finally get a win at least last weekend, and they did look a little bit better against Cole, really. Is this baby steps?
Yeah, I think to start with, it is. I think the turnover of players in the summer, although we sort of held out hope that they would be able to continue their form this season after that incredible year last year, with a sort of a start where they were winning games and winning well in Ligue, but perhaps beating teams like Dijon and Toulouse and a very weak Marseille was perhaps paper over the cracks a little bit, and they do need to relearn who they are, and they need to kind of work out exactly what this team is, and in its current sort of guise, if you like, and what it's best at, because they can't do the same things they did last season, and they can't sort of flood forward against sides and have it be so effective anymore without Mbappe and Bakayoko backing them up, and it's disappointing, but they do need to sort of evolve, and I think that's happening, because if you look at that Con game you mentioned, they sort of picked a team that perhaps shows that, in the fact that Falcao sort of played through the middle, and you had Lopez and Keita sort of either side of him, Tom Lamar playing a little bit more centrally, and then Fabinho and sort of the deep lying player with Tielemans alongside him, and that suits a lot of those players. It's not the same 4-4-2 gung-ho system that it was last year, and perhaps if they had this team, they would have beaten Con by that's 3-4-5 perhaps, but they still won the game and won it well, and they made the most out of what they had. And I think that's something that Jardim, after last season, is just taking them some time to work out. But it depends. Their end game is it sort of depends on how he can sort of coalesce that 11 and how he can get the best out of those players. It's interesting to see some. Oh, sorry. It's interesting to nearly on my mic over them.
That's all right.
It's interesting to see how he's going to use some of those players. And I wondered if you felt they had enough depth based on that sort of that evolving team, and whether their signings had come off yet, because we haven't seen. Obviously, it's very early, so it's only late October, but Tielemans hasn't been used too much. Diakabi played a couple of good games, but then has only made the bench in the last 3 games, and he got 2 minutes last week. Lopez has come out from loan and looked pretty good. Maybe he's come off, okay, because he's a loan return. And Keita, I'm still think the jury's out. So we've also often lauded the way Monaco have gone about building their team, but have they had a bit of an off summer, do you think? Is there an argument that says perhaps this summer wasn't the best in terms of transfers?
Yes and no. I think that sometimes we're blinded by the fact of last season, that they had a great transfer window, but at the same time, if we cast our minds back to it a little bit, the only real player that came in and made a major difference really was Kamil Glick for transfer-wise, and that's an established international footballer that was playing at a pretty good level in Serie A. You think about the rest of that team, I mean, Benjamin Mendy was a new signing, but he was established at Marseille. Djibril Sidibe was a new signing, again, established himself at Lille pretty strongly. A lot of these other players that have come in the summer, Yuri Tielemans, young lad, he's only played really Belgian league football. Obviously, has played some Champions League football, but nothing further than the group stages, really. Keita Balde, again, a young player. He's had one great season at Lazio. He slowly looked like a good player there, but it's going to take him a little bit of time because Monaco have to adapt to him as much as he needs to adapt to them because he's in a different style. He's not necessarily a striker in the sense of Mbappe. He's maybe more of a inside forward style of player. So it's Monaco fitting him either up top with Falcao or changing their formation to adjust to him a little bit. So you can kind of say yes and no. I don't think any Monaco signing really in the last couple of years, other than Mendy, other than Glick, and you might say Sidibe, but some people might disagree with that, have really hit the ground running. You think back to Fabinho, he looked okay in his first season. He looked good in his second season at right back and then moved to centre midfield. Bakayoko was injured for a number of years. Silva always looked pretty good, but he's such a fantastic player, really. But I don't think they've done too badly. It's just adjusting players. It's like I pointed out on one of my preview pieces that Ronnie Lopez is slowly, finally getting his place in the team and where he stands in this all, playing on the right-hand side. He's finally carving his own niche outside of where Bernardo was, where he's maybe probing more in behind teams, and he's willing to get to the byline and be creative as well, and he's starting to score goals as well, which is great. He's finally finding his place in the team, and that's what others need to start doing, like Tielemans, like Georges has done relatively successfully so far, at least anyway, and Keita Balde. They just need to find where they are. Congolo as well, although he's maybe more of a backup player, but they'll get there. I think it's been great to see Gabriel Boschilia back in the last couple of weeks as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's a bit disappointing with Jean Moutinho dipping a little bit, but it was nice to see Lamar in a more central role. I thought he played pretty well as well. That could be an interesting one to play him there with Ronnie on the right and Keita Balde on the left with Falcao up front, because then it mixes the strike force up a little bit and changes something about them. So I think they'll be okay. I think the last sort of month was more of a blip than something that we should be completely alarmed about, because this team has a season sort of a transition. We think back to before that title-winning season, they never looked like really that we were going to click into gear like they did. But the season before that, they were absolutely terrific with getting to the Champions League semi-finals and pushing PSG to a relatively decent standard, at least, even though they only ended up finishing third after dropping in the last couple of weeks. But yeah, I think they'll be okay. And in this one, I think they'll be okay as well. I have a feeling that Bordeaux are starting to dip a little. And if they do play the likes of Balde and Lemar and Falcao, Toulalan's going to have a minor heart attack, I think. I'm going to go for a 2-0 win for Monaco. Yeah,
it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think Bordeaux might actually benefit from playing a team that are going to give them a bit more space. And those are apart from the PSG games, sides that have come onto them a bit more, they've used that spacing behind them that opens up. So Monaco might give them the opportunity, but I do agree that they do look like they're sort of starting to dip a little bit. So maybe Monaco, this might be their moment. So 3-2 to Monaco, perhaps. I think there might be goals in this one.
Yeah, it'd be a great little Saturday treat if we get that at least. On to Sunday's fixtures and a team that have nicely in form in Lyon, and a team that are completely and utterly out of form, although they won in midweek in Metz, who I want to start with because obviously they sacked their manager straight after that game at the weekend. Philippe Hinchberger has gone. It's Jose Pino that will be in charge for this one and for the at least foreseeable future. Adam, they had that little glimpse against PSG where they played really well for 60 minutes until a red card. They obviously picked up their first win the week afterwards against Angers, but then it dipped again. What's going on?
Well, I think Metz are an interesting situation because, first of all, what's really gone wrong for them this season is that they didn't retain Cheikh Diabate. He was absolutely massive for them when he came in last winter. Metz were bottom at one point around that period, and between him and Ismail Sarr, between them they kept them up really. Sheikh Diabate's goals and Sarr's pace and creativity, playing on the wing instead of playing up front, which is bizarre what he's doing at Rennes at the moment. But that's a whole other story. But between them, they kept them up, and the fee they got for Sarr, you would have felt like they would have been able to at least adequately replace him with. There's so much talent in Ligue 2 that they could have looked at, even in Ligue 1 with that 10 million fee I think they got from him in the end. And Sheikh Diabate is a free agent. That's still, as far as I'm aware, anyway, still a free agent, and was well into the transfer window, past the end of the transfer window. And it didn't. I don't know if there were moves made, and what happened to that deal. But I would have spent that money they got from Sarr to give him the wages that whatever he wanted to keep him at the club, because he's a proven Ligue 1 goal scorer. And even at Bordeaux, he was one of a handful in the league that you knew if you played every game, he'd be getting 15 goals. For a side like Metz, that would be absolutely huge. And I really feel like you can't sell your best two players or let go your best two players in Diabate and Sarr and then replace them with Emmanuel Riviere and Nolan Roux and expect to stay up. It's ridiculous. Two players who perhaps classic Ligue 1 strikers in the fact that they have terrible goal records. So they're not scoring enough goals, first of all. They did sign Mathieu de Sevy from Standard, who's proved to be a really good player for them. So they have sort of at least partially replaced Sarr. So that may develop into something later in the year. But he's not a goal scorer particularly. He doesn't score too many goals and didn't score loads in Belgium, as far as I'm aware, anyway. So they're lacking in goals to start with. And Philipp Hinchberger was unfortunate, but perhaps he was it was a necessary move from the club, because he did well to get them promoted. He did well to keep them up last season. But as I said, there was a huge caveat to that in the players that hadn't given the tools that he's been given this season. You even look at their defence, and Simon Follett and Guido Milan, who are two really good centre-backs for them, both left. Philip Walscheid's barely played so far this year, who came in to replace them. And their team is weaker for a side that conceded the most goals in the league last season. Their team is weaker than it was. So they don't have the players. They don't have the squad to keep them in the league as it stands, at least as far as I can see it. In terms of a replacement, the name that immediately came to mind when I heard his sacking was Frederic Antonetti, straight away. And I actually saw a poll on a local newspaper that out of sort of 10 candidates, Antonetti was the runaway choice of fans, or at least he was quite far ahead. So 35%, I think he had on that vote on that newspaper's website, which says something about the type of manager they're going to need. They basically need a French Sam Allardyce to keep them up. And Antonetti sort of fits that bill a little bit in that he's very, very robust and very forceful, and he'd organise them to adventure their lives. And I think that's the only way they stay up now, unless they go out and they've got some of that Sarr money left over, assuming they were able to spend it at all, and they sign a striker. I think that's the only way they even have a chance. So I feel sorry for Hinchberger, but perhaps they just don't have the team, and there was nothing he could really do unless they go and sign some better players. One thing I would say about the manager, though, Luke Holtz, who's a Luxembourg manager, has been mentioned. I'd really like to see him given the job. It's taken a while at Luxembourg, but they actually didn't finish bottom of their group in qualifying this time, finished above Belarus, got 6 points. And I know that Max Quelch-Walls, who's been on our podcast before, he actually covers Belgium football, and I know that he's a big fan of his, and he's done really, really well to develop that team from pretty much nothing. So as a long-term appointment, maybe he'd be a really good signing, given that Luxembourg are kind of the Mets, kind of the Luxembourg team being really near the border, and there's sort of an affinity there. So that might be a really good way to go, but it might involve them getting relegated and coming back first. I don't know, but some interesting times ahead at Mets, and it'll be really interesting to see how they go in terms of manager. But this weekend, Lyon is perhaps, for Jose Pinot, is going to be a pretty tough baptism. They got thrashed there 5-0 last year. And I'm really surprised at Lyon, given how well they played last week. They went to Troyes, who looked really competitive up to this point, and won 5-0, and were genuinely really, really good to pie back on form with a hat-trick. Do you think Lyon are capable of fighting on two fronts this season, Nathan? I know that they did very well last year in the Europa League, but they weren't able to challenge really for a Champions League spot in the end. They were a little bit off the pace. Do you think they can do both this year? Stay in the Europa League and really push on and come third, perhaps?
It's tough, isn't it? It's tough. I do want to start by saying that I obviously listened to Monday's show, and the talk about Memphis Depay's performance, and I do want to quickly eat my words, because there have been a number of times where I've questioned his ability and questioned his commitment, and he did play really well in that Troyes game. He scored two excellent goals, really. The first and second are super goals, and then the third, he deservedly pulls that penalty away from Mariano's hands. I don't know what he was thinking. I'm pretty sure if I was in Memphis's position, I would have thumped him if he'd tried to take it instead of me. But he should have scored, really, other than the handball on the line for that as well, and did really well to get round the keeper. He showed a real commitment and a real hunger, but also he got on with the job. I think it was telling from the celebrations as well. Both of those first two goals, he did a bit of a fist pump, grabbed the ball, went back to the centre spot. I think that shows that this might be the change that he needed. He needed that kick in Lyon. I mean, he got it quite early at Manchester United, and that maybe affected his confidence, but he just assumed he was starting at Lyon, it felt, and that seems to have kicked him into gear. I mean, the run he does for the leads up to the penalty, where he absolutely storms past Mariano Diaz, who does not pay attention to him at all, and it just seems to land at him, and he ends up winning the penalty anyway. But the effort he put in there just showed his commitment, I think, and credit to him. But going back to the question, really, I just don't think they have enough of a squad to fight on two fronts, not this season at least. They have some promise. I think that their defence looks a little bit better this season. Marcelo looks relatively decent, but especially at the wing-back positions, Ferland Mendy looks a really good signing, which is incredible to say that when you say that Marcel is a seasoned Ligue 1 veteran with Guingamp in the past couple of years, a really good left-back in his own right. They're two great options to have there. And Kenny Tete and Rafael are having a great competition. Obviously, the Brazilians may be a bit better going forward. The Dutchman has shown a real adept ability to defend on occasions, especially when he played against Neymar. So it's nice to see that they're starting to fix areas. I still think their midfield needs a little bit of work, in the sense of behind Toussaint and Ndombele, who are you playing? It may be that, like they did at Troyes, that where Aouar is a good backup to anyone on those attacking places, whether it be Fekir or Depay. I think he works quite nicely in that role as a centre attacking midfielder, but behind Ndombele and Toussaint, I don't think Ferry's good enough anymore. And you look at the players otherwise than that, there's not really got an enormous amount. But they have attacking talent. They've got Cornet as well, who come off the bench, who's been a little bit of a mixed bag this season, but they feel like they have the depth ready for next season to do something like that. It feels like they just need a year together. They need a year working out what their best 11 is and what players still fit into the equation when they are called upon, especially the younger players, and then go from there and maybe add a couple of more in the summer. But they aren't far off. I don't think they're as far off as people might have predicted, especially at the start of the season, but they aren't a million miles off. And in this one, Adam, what do you think the result will be?
I think Mets are going to... I think it's going to be very similar to last year. I'm going to say 4-0 Lyon.
Yeah, I would run and hide if I'm Jeremy Smith. And this moment in time, this could be a riot, I think. I'm going to go a little bit out there and say 6-0. They have a great attack from Lyon when they're clicking, and I assume that Fekir is going to start in this one, and he's got 7 goals. Diaz has got 8. Depay has 5 now. He scored the hat-trick at the weekend, and Traore has a couple. They are just so potent in those attacking areas, and if you can't keep the pressure off yourselves by scoring goals at the other end, they are asking for a world of hurt, I think. But we'll move on to the final game of Sunday. It always seems to be Marseille at the moment, but it is them visiting someone at least now, and it's in the Lille, and the game that Marcelo Bielsa's probably been looking forward to the most since returning to French football. But Lille again last week, another not exciting performance. It's not. They struggled again against Rennes. They had brief moments where they looked okay, but it's. I think sighing is probably the most active way of putting their season so far, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's such a shame, isn't it, that when Marcelo Bielsa came in, the one thing you expect is excitement. You expect a team that are going to play on the front foot, that are going to press, that are going to play out the pitch, that are going to leave ludicrous spaces at the back, and the games are going to be high scoring. And it might go horribly wrong, but it's going to be, it's going to be fun. And it really hasn't. It's been dire for Lille, and they haven't even had the classic Bielsa curve where they start like a steam train and then trail off. They haven't had that. They've started like they've already played 25 games, and they're that Marseille team that really sort of flagged on the last third of the season under him when they were top at Christmas, I think. So they sort of jumped to the final stage of Bielsa rather than enjoying the first two stages of Bielsa, which is a bit of a shame. But I think when you still look at their team, there's still a lot of quality there. We did mention previously about their loan policy and the fact that Zeko, who I thought looked really good for them last year when he came in from Braga at Christmas. I thought he was a really robust midfielder. He's a very sort of he has a slightly unusual skill set in the fact that he's a reducer, he's a tackler, but he's decent on the ball, and he's got a decent range of passing as well. And he was a useful player, and given how slight their team is at the moment, he would have been really useful for them. Liam Slift, he's gone to Dijon as well and done really well there. He's a player. Every time he came on for the last year, I really felt added something, at least most of the time anyway. So they've sort of Bielsa, and also letting Depreville go as well. So their policy seems a bit odd, and they're a little bit like a number of league in size. Perhaps Rennes are a good example. Metz, I mentioned now, that they don't really have a striker. Nicolas Pepe is in a very similar situation to Ismail Assar in that he's a winger, and they signed him from Angers when he was playing as a winger, and he's been playing up front, and they just don't have a source of goals. So the more they attack, the less. If they're going to play that classic Bielsa way, but if they do attack, they don't score enough goals to counteract the holes they might leave. But I still think there is some shining, some silver linings to this massive Lille cloud. And Thiago Mendes has been absolutely brilliant since he arrived from Brazil. Ibrahim Amadou's still a very good player and he's pretty versatile. Can use him at centre back and in defensive midfield. But I really feel like Bielsa, if it stays like this, then they could genuinely get relegated. And I think that the club may need to make an unfortunate decision if it keeps going like this. A little bit like the Leicester situation with Ranieri. When Ranieri left, no one really wanted him to go, at least outside the club. Inside the club, maybe a very different matter. But in terms of from a fan's point of view, it felt not premature, but a little bit harsh, perhaps. But if they kept him, they may have gone down, and that would have been a disaster, having won the league the previous year. And I know that Bielsa is good friends with Gerard Lopez, the relatively new owner of Lille, and Lopez and the LOSC Unlimited new wave of board members and of hierarchy there won't want to sack Bielsa because he's their marquee signing, really, despite the fact they went and signed 15, 17 players over the summer. He's the main man for them, and they see their philosophy as Bielsa's philosophy. And if they're not getting results, they may have to not eat their words, but they may have to walk it back a little bit, and they may have to focus staying in Ligue 1 because although the way Bielsa plays is very attractive, it's never been proven to last all that long, and it may be an unsustainable model to keep him in charge playing like this. If they get relegated, then it's not all over, but it's going to be very difficult to come back from, and it's a massive step back for them if that would occur. Obviously, they've got lots of quality, and it would be amazing if they did get relegated, even with Bielsa in charge. But they can't ignore the possibility. I just feel like it can't get better, can it? Can you see them getting that Bielsa vintage that they really want between now and the end of the season?
No. No, in all honesty.
No, I can't.
It feels like Bielsa is on the Louis van Gaal curve in the sense that he's had great moments, and there's no doubt how influential he's been as a coach to both young coaches and the style of play, and has done great things. But he just doesn't work anymore. His methods, his grinding ability to force almost players to run through walls for him by just constantly training is just not the way the world works anymore, unfortunately. And the players, you can tell, are just not reacting to it, and they're probably going in every week thinking, I've got another 12-hour training session here for another 5 days in a row and then play on a Saturday and lose and then have to do more of this because it's just not working. And this is what happens with players, that they will just get tired of it. The players will go, well, what's the point in listening to his methods of working so hard every week to just end up drawing or losing 1-0 away from home? It's not how it works in the modern day, and that's why a lot of managers sign him as a great innovator and a great coach. But I don't think he's ever been the greatest man manager. He never protests about it really, in the sense that he's never really been the one to put an arm around a player. Really, he's much more of a teacher sort of role in anything than a coach. I think he would make a fantastic coach under something like a general manager, or a director of football, or someone who can sort of handle that personnel side of things a little bit more. So it's not weighed upon him. But I think that football has maybe passed Marcelo Bielsa behind now. I had an inkling that might have been happening when he was at Marseille still, but it's more than clear now that's the issue. And talk about returning ghosts, at least. That Marseille were excellent last Sunday. Really, they probably really deserve to nick that game against PSG, and that should now be a springboard for them, shouldn't it?
Yeah, you would hope so. I think I've said it before, but I kind of feel like Marseille, when Marseille are at the top of their game and Marseille are really playing well and they have a good team and they are, a force in Europe, although it's going to be very difficult to be a genuine force at the top end of it, but in the Champions League at least, then that's only good for Ligue 1, and Ligue 1 is always at its best when Marseille are at their best, if you like, because they're such a huge club, and the Velodrome, when it's rocking as it was last week, is unbelievable. It's arguably atmosphere and intensity and just sort of sheer sort of theatre wise, one of, if not the best ground in Europe at its when it's at its top. When it's not, it can be a massive black hole, and as we found out 2 seasons ago when they finished 13th, that it can suck the life out of a team. But Marseille at their best are brilliant. So hopefully this is a start of something new, and it is a turnaround. But as we said, there's a lot to be proved in that area, given that we've sort of talked about the Champions Project on this podcast quite a lot, and we sort of mocked it a little bit because of its ridiculous name and the way they've kind of gone about it seems a little bit counterintuitive. Sorry, that it doesn't. Things aren't necessarily going in the way that they would expect, and they're sort of, as we sort of discussed before, they're kind of a budget PSG, and the fact they've sort of signed big names, and those big names haven't really hit the heights that they would have hoped for, and it's not disastrous, but because they're still in a decent league position. But up until last weekend, I honestly see it was 2 or 3 games away from being in genuine trouble. And I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, you may have mentioned that they could have lost. I can't actually remember who the game was against, but you might have mentioned that had they lost that game, he might have even lost his job. It was the Nice game, which ended up winning 4-2, and they played very well there. So, they're still on a knife edge a little bit, but that Nice win was from home, although Nice, caveats there, because Nice aren't Nice from last season against PSG last week, which I thought they should have won. Although there are also caveats there in that PSG took them for granted, and they did defend for a lot of that game. Defended well, to be fair to them, and took their chances. And obviously, Gustavo's goal is a screamer for miles out, and Tuvan does very well to get ahead of his marker and score that volley. But they didn't have too many other chances. They had some pressure a little bit in the middle of the second half, but overall, they weren't necessarily on top. But they did play well and deserved their point. So whether it's turning around remains to be seen, but I really, really hope it is. It just, one thing I was going to sort of mention on this topic to you about Marseille is I'm still not entirely sure what Garcia's best team is and what he thinks he's best. Playing Payet on the left, and then he's now moved to his side. And Payet was anonymous last week. He was, despite the good performance and Tuvan playing well and Gustavo playing really well, he was nowhere to really be seen. And you've seen Maxime Lopez has been dropped out of the first 11. He was almost ever present last year, and is a very promising young player, still only 20, and he's already made a little bit of a scapegoat for their sort of lack of vision and lack of creativity in midfield. He's dropped out of the team. Sambro Anguissa is a good player, but whether he's good enough to carry this Gustavo to sort of anchor that midfield remains open for debate. And a shadow of it for myself from last season at Monaco, especially in the last few weeks. So he's really even first choice. So does Rudy Garcia know his best team, and how does he go about setting up that best team? If you were the manager, Nathan, what would you go with?
Well, for starters, I don't think he knows what his best team is. He keeps changing it week on week. I think, at least for the time being, the back five is pretty much picks itself. I don't think there's anyone you could really stick in there, really. I think Sakai, Rolando, Rami, although he has issues, they don't really have anyone better than him. And Amavi make plenty of sense. Then it starts to get a little bit convoluted. I mean, Gustavo, I like Gustavo, but he's not quite as much of a defensive midfielder as people give him give him the credit for. They think he's just someone who should sit in front of the defense, and he maybe does.
I think he needs a partner, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does too much. And in all honesty, I prefer Zambo and Guisa to Gustavo. I think he's more of a solid base, shall we say, in the sense that he's a bit more physical. He's a bit more willing to hold his position and allow more creative players, because if you're going to play a two-man midfield, which you really should with this Marseille side, I don't think Gustavo is the man you want in the middle next to someone that's going to be someone like Sanson or Lopez, probably Sanson on form especially. It was strange to see him left out, but
yeah.
In all honesty, I think their main issue is attack. I think you obviously start Tovan, and you probably start Payet. He tends to play better on the left, Payet. I don't understand this thought that people seem to think he's better in the middle or playing central. He's a much better player out on that left-hand side and allowed to cut in. But the real issue is, who is that man who they're going to play up top? If they can get the form out of him, it's Mitroglou. He's the most prolific. He's got the most well-rounded skill set of being able to hold the ball and be an attacker. If it's form at the moment, you probably would have said Clinton and G, because he's pacey and he's grabbed a couple of goals in the last couple of weeks. He's sort of been left in the cold a little bit. He did come on, obviously, for Mitroglou at the weekend. And like you mentioned, Germain I just don't think Germain works in the team without someone in and around him.
Yeah, agreed.
I think that at Nice he excelled because Hatem Ben Arfa was so close to him. He did well when he needed to at Monaco because he was near one of Falcao or Kylian Mbappe to support him. So far this season, when he has played, they've played 4-3-3 without someone really close to him at any point. If they play more of a 4-2-3-1 with maybe Lopez in behind him or Sanson in behind him, that maybe gives him a little bit more of an edge. And it's worth a try because he can be an excellent centre forward. But it's picking between those three that's probably the most important issue they've got at the moment, as well as probably that midfield 2/3 and what the right mix is in there, because they just aren't quite getting it right at the moment. But in this one, they're going to thump Lyon. I think this is going to be 3-0. Adam?
Yeah, Marseille are better away from home this season on the whole. So yeah, 3-1, I'll say.
Yeah, I do start to feel for Bielsa every single day that he's itching to find that plane and get a one-way ticket back to Argentina. In all honesty, I wouldn't blame him. I think it's maybe time he takes another nice long holiday. That's all for this week. My thanks to you, Adam, for joining me, and everyone at home for joining us for this two-way conversation version of our preview show for a change. Don't forget, we will be back with the main show, and I will be there this week, although I obviously missed our 100th celebration on Monday. So it'll be at the same time, same place as it usually is. And join us for the preview show again next Thursday. But before that, enjoy your weekend of football.